Allahu Akbar.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay. Thank you for the introduction. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to speak to you all. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashraf al-anbiya'i wal-mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammad. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdata min lisani yafqahu qawli. So one day, a man in Mecca saw an old woman carrying a heavy load, and he offered to help her. And all this old woman does throughout their encounter is to mock and malign the Prophet, peace be upon him. She said, "Don't talk to me about Muhammad, and we will get along just fine. He misled the weak ones. This man divided our society. Nothing good has come from him." That man happened to be the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself. But this woman didn't know that yet. He says nothing. He continues to help the woman with her load. He does not lash back at her. He does not pray for her destruction. He does not drop her stuff and tell her to fend for herself. No, he helps the woman anyway. And at the end, after she reached her destination and he dropped her stuff off, the Prophet walks away. And she turns to him and says, "Wait, what's your name?" And he says, "Muhammad." And as you can imagine, this woman is so astonished that really all she could do is accept Islam. So this is the Prophet's character. We must model the Prophet's character. We must give a hand of help to those that oppose us, not because it starts a much needed discourse and brings people to the deen more than a debate or a lecture or an argument ever could. We must be a community that is willing to help all those around us, even if they are the same people that oppose us. We must take the higher road and lend a helping hand to all those who need it. And not everyone needs the same kind of help. Some people need financial assistance, some need food, some need shelter, and some just need a simple conversation and some spiritual guidance. And we must be a people that provide all that. But the sad reality is that Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry is on the rise in the United States and in the West in general. Yearly polls taken by ABC News show a 10-point increase in unfavorable views of Muslims since 2001, and doubling of those who say that Islam encourages violence since 2002. As the tragic events of September 11 fade into history, anti-Muslim sentiments continue to rise. Anti-Muslim bigotry has been around since the beginning of Islam and has been around in the US for decades. But why is Islamophobia on the rise now? There's a report called Fear Inc. How many of you have heard of this report? Okay, so just a few hands. So if you haven't read Fear Inc., please do so. So this report was released by the Center for American Progress in 2011, and it thoroughly documents the anti-Muslim network's funding, messengers, and reach. Its efforts have manifested in anti-sharia legislation across dozens of states, bigoted training materials for law enforcement and intelligence communities, and the character assassination of mainstream national Muslim organizations. So the first thing that we can do is to educate ourselves on the network behind this Islamophobia sentiment and the anti-Muslim hate. This is a small group of conservative foundations and wealthy donors that are the lifeblood of the Islamophobia network in America. This includes spokespersons and misinformation experts like Robert Spencer and Pamela Geller. These individuals and organizations have an agenda to marginalize American Muslims at every turn. Their conspiracy theories about Muslims even bear a remarkable resemblance to classic anti-Semitism. So we must understand that these people are really profiting off of the fear-mongering. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So let's put them out of business. Every few years, there's a new buzzword. First, it's jihad, then it's hijab, then it's sharia. These people are always behind the hysteria, and they just literally thrive off the hate. So the anti-sharia legislation efforts began 2 years ago, and there's literally just one man behind this anti-sharia legislation, and his name is David Yerushalmi, who literally drafted the model legislation with the intention of casting sharia as the greatest threat to American freedom and began going after legislators. And the sad thing is these legislators don't even know what sharia is and don't understand what they're proposing in Congress. There was even an interview once with a congressperson, and he was asked, "Oh, what is sharia?" And he said, "Oh, I have to refer back to my notes." So this legislation has been introduced in over 25 states, and most recently it was passed in Kansas, in addition to Oklahoma and Tennessee. This would make the daily practice of Islam, such as praying, a criminal activity punishable by law, which means you would get a prison sentence just for praying or making wudu in public. This is obviously unconstitutional, and there is no doubt that it violates the Constitution and the Religious Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment, and there is no way it could go through. But even if these laws are overturned, the anti-Muslim campaign has an impact on our daily lives and on our existence as a society in the US. These campaigns work to make anti-Muslim sentiments mainstream, and when that happens, our civil liberties and rights get eroded, followed by our human rights, followed by just a miserable existence for Muslims in America. So we must stop the tide now. And just one example of how this fearful and hateful climate impacts us and our children is that even though Muslims make up only 2% of the US workforce, they filed nearly a whopping 25% of religious discrimination claims in 2009. So according to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, post 9/11 through 2011, they saw a 150% rise in workplace discrimination claims by Muslims. So we must be on the offensive and on the front lines to combat Islamophobia. And this brings me to the work that I do at the Council for Social Justice. What we're working on now is the Defending Religious Freedom, Understanding Sharia campaign. And the purpose of this campaign is to first and foremost educate ourselves and our community. It is important for us to understand as Muslims living in the US what Sharia means and how we apply Sharia in our daily lives. Only then can we counter the myths that are surrounding Islam and Sharia. And this is a much needed initiative, really. I remember when we sent out the ICNA newsletter, and to my surprise, I got an email from a Muslim woman who said, "I am a Muslim woman, and I do have some concerns regarding Sharia law, and that is why I have not supported this effort so far. My concerns are related to the woman's rights under current interpretation of Sharia." And she listed her concerns. So let us then move on to what is Sharia? So Sharia literally means a path to water. And in that sense, it means the path to God. And this Sharia is the ideal law of Allah according to Islam. So Muslims believe that Islamic legal system is one that aims towards justice, fairness, and the good life. And Islamic law, as we all know, is derived from two sources, the Quran and the Sunnah. And what is generally referred to as Islamic law is actually separated into two distinct categories, Sharia and fiqh. So Sharia is the external, unchanging law or way of truth and justice as God intended it to be. So in essence, this is something that we can never achieve. It is the utopia that will never exist on earth. So as human beings, we have to strive for perfection, and we have to strive to realize Sharia at the best of our abilities. And this is where fiqh comes in the picture. So fiqh is a human attempt to fulfill the eternal law as it exists in God's mind. So fiqh, unlike Sharia, is changing, and it's subject to error, and it's alterable. So Sharia plays a central role in Islam, and yet it is the least understood aspect of our faith by Muslims and non-Muslims alike. So when you have the media define and dictate the narrative and tell us what Sharia is, we have a problem, because we end up with misinformed non-Muslims and confused Muslims who don't know how to respond to the attacks on our faith. The truth is that so much hinges on the particular conception that one has of Islamic law and the interpretation that one follows. But really, Sharia is literally a way of life. To me, I see Sharia and Islam interchangeably, because Sharia is not just a legal law, but it is not limited to legal issues. So praying, fasting, zakah, hajj, all of that is part of Sharia. Sadaqah, good character, marriage, divorce, burials, all of that is part of Sharia. So the question then becomes, what is the purpose of Sharia? And there are 5 objectives of Sharia, and they're called maqasid al-Sharia. And they are the preservation of religion, life, lineage, intellect, and property. And according to all the schools of thoughts, according to all the madahib, the purpose of Sharia is to serve the best interests of human beings. And this is called tahqiq masalih al-ibad. So really, Sharia is for our benefit as a society, as Muslims, and for all of humanity, not just Muslims. So put differently, it is to achieve the ultimate moral and ethical objectives that represent the essence of godliness on this earth. So we must be careful not to get lost in what is being pushed in America as the image of Sharia, that it is a barbaric set of rules designed to keep people in fear and shackles, that it is against women and minorities. The fact of the matter is that no one is calling for hudud, and hudud are the penal laws that are part of Sharia. In fact, hudud comprise only 15 verses of the 6,236 verses of the Quran. That's less than 1%. So, they paint this image that Sharia is hudud, that Sharia is the stoning of an adulterer, the cutting of the hands, the lashing of people who violate the law. But that is really less than 1% of what Sharia is. And ironically, many of these punishments that are implemented in Islamic countries in the name of Sharia are in fact a violation of Sharia itself. You cannot implement Sharia when there are no freedoms. You cannot implement Sharia in a dictatorship. You cannot implement Sharia on the poor and not on the elite. So mercy and compassion are the essence of Sharia, which is designed to protect all members of society and to improve the condition of humanity, and again, not just the Muslims. Sharia protects minorities, it protects religious minorities and ethnic minorities. It protects Jews and Christians and even people who just don't believe in God. So as Muslims in America, all we are asking to do is to be able to practice our faith, just like every religious community in America. We're asking to be able to worship freely, to have the freedom to follow the ritual and social and spiritual guidelines of our faith. It's our ability to practice Islam personally in our personal lives, to be able to deal with marriage and divorce and inheritance and wills and burials according to Islamic law. We're not trying to bring Sharia to American law. We're not trying to take over the US. The Muslims aren't coming, we're already here. So now moving on to women's rights in Islam. There's no doubt that Islam liberated the female from the oppression of society. Islam elevated the status of women. It prohibited female infanticide, it abolished women's status as property, it granted women the right to receive their own dowry, the changing of a marriage to a contractual relationship. It gave them the ability to control their property and to use their maiden name after marriage. The Quran also granted women financial maintenance from their husbands and controlled the husband's free ability to divorce. And the Quran declares in many ayats that men and women are equal in the eyes of Allah. Man and woman were created to be equal parts of a pair. The Quran describes the relationship between men and women as one of love and mercy. Men and women are to be like members of one another, like each other's garments. So when we get asked questions like, does Islam oppress women? Why do Muslim women have to cover? What does Islam say about honor killings, domestic violence, forced marriage, female circumcision? We should have the answers to all those questions. And this is why we are leading this initiative. And we've actually created an FAQ booklet that will be soon published by ICNA that addresses some of these questions that are constantly brought up. Yesterday, I got to meet a remarkable group of sisters at ICNA. And we had a small dinner, and one sister said, "We're so busy defending ourselves all the time and countering the myths on Muslim women that we're not given the opportunity to shine. And so we must stop being a reactionary community. Let us be proactive. Let us shine. Let our females shine. Let our girls shine." And mashallah, some of the women in the room were so inspiring, doing work with ICNA and outside of ICNA, working for ICNA Relief, responding to disasters, coordinating programs for young Muslims, working at a health clinic or a shelter, representing Muslim women in sports, like Sister Ibtihaj, who is a professional fencer and wears her hijab proudly. It's people like Tawakkul Karman, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, who make me proud to be a Muslim woman. When asked about her hijab and told that it was not proportionate with her level of intellect, she replied, "Man in the early times was almost naked, and as his intellect evolved, he started wearing clothes. What I am today and what I am wearing represents the highest level of thought and civilization that man has achieved and is not regressive. It is the removal of clothes, again, that is regressive." So the role that Shariah plays in our lives as Muslims must be clearly outlined, not just for the broader community to see, but also for ourselves. Aside from the personal obligations of fasting, prayer, and zakah, we must keep in mind that charitable work, social justice, building of character are all part of Shariah. We must become a community that is involved with the rest of society. We must be at the front lines. So when we implement Shariah in our own lives, we will see a difference not only in ourselves as humans, but also we will see that we are much more spiritually and ritually elevated. Not only that, but we will see a difference in how others view us in the broader society. When we're at the front lines of involvement, we will see that hopefully the future generation, the future Muslim generation will not face the same hardships that we are facing today, that we will stop having to hide our faith and because no one will be vilifying it. We are a community that is leading charitable efforts for the poor and the needy and providing health, financial, and spiritual assistance to all people in all walks of life. And we are also at the forefront of school meetings and involved in the education and extracurricular activities of our children. Only then can we get past this stage. And only then can we challenge the image that is pushed on us by the media and the Islamophobes. So let us practice our faith proudly and with dignity. Don't shy away from practicing your faith. Become involved in society, in civic engagement. As a mother, do you go to your children's school? Are you involved in PTA? As a Muslim woman, how do you deal with your neighbors? Do you have a relationship with them? As a Muslim female student, are you involved in MSA and school activities? How can you help in this particular campaign? So get familiar with Shariah and spread the word about this campaign. Reach out to your public library, reach out to your local church and mosque and see if they're willing to have an interfaith discussion. Do you know how many Americans have met a Muslim? In 2010, there was a Time poll that reported that 62% of Americans claim to have never met a Muslim. That's a really sad statistic. That means that less than half of Americans have met a Muslim. So no wonder that many of these people have this image of Islam that they do. Now, if we change that statistic so that 75% or more of Americans have met a Muslim, I guarantee you that the perception of Muslims will change to the positive. So in conclusion, we have to educate ourselves. not just on Sharia, but also on the source of the anti-Muslim bigotry. We must be clear on our own shubuhat on Sharia and Islam, and by doing so, we can clear the misconceptions of others. We have to stop being a reactionary community. We must be proactive, and we must be inviting to all. Our leaders and our public figures within the Muslim American community need to further develop a discourse and identity for civic and political action. Let us encourage our communities to be involved, even if we disagree with the policies of this country, both domestic and foreign, and let us take responsibility to change all of America's ills as proud American Muslims. Jazakumullah khair.